In a control room built to never sleep, a screen flashes an alert that no engineer on shift has ever seen live before. Every timestamp arriving from orbit has simply, silently stopped. The system's reach extends far beyond navigation apps and delivery routes. Every power grid, financial exchange, cell tower, and cargo ship on the planet checks its clock against a single signal broadcast from orbit. So ask the real question. What would actually happen if every navigation satellite circling Earth, launched by every nation, went dark on the very same morning and never sent a signal home again? These systems share a name: Global Navigation Satellite Systems, or GNSS. The family includes America's GPS, Russia's GLONASS, Europe's Galileo, and China's Beidou, for separate constellations orbiting overhead right now. In ordinary operation, many receivers already cross-check more than one constellation at once, a technique called receiver autonomous integrity monitoring. So losing GPS alone, or Galileo alone, rarely blinds a device completely. The scenario running through this thought experiment assumes something far rarer: all four constellations falling silent at exactly the same moment, with no other satellite left to check against. GPS began as a military project, and for years the United States deliberately blurred the civilian signal, holding ordinary consumer accuracy to about 100 meters. Switching that limit off overnight sharpened it to roughly 10. Each satellite carries an atomic clock accurate to within a few billionths of a second, and it broadcasts one constant message toward the ground below. Here, precisely, is the current time. A receiver on the ground listens to at least 4 of these satellites simultaneously, comparing tiny differences in arrival time to calculate not only where it is, but exactly when it is. Position is only part of what this network provides. Every satellite's broadcast also functions as the most precise public clock ever built, available almost anywhere on Earth. Start with electricity. Devices called phasor measurement units sample a power grid up to 60 times every second, stamping each reading with satellite time, so control centers can compare conditions across thousands of kilometers almost instantly. Without that shared clock, operators cannot easily tell whether a voltage swing in one region is the cause or the consequence of a swing somewhere else, and a small imbalance can cascade into a much larger blackout. Now consider money. Financial regulators require trading systems to timestamp every single order within a fraction of a second of the national atomic clock, and firms typically hit that mark using satellite timing receivers. When those timestamps drift even slightly, the true sequence of trades becomes legally uncertain because regulators can no longer prove with confidence which order actually arrived first in a crowded, fast-moving market. Telecommunications lean on the same signal. Cellular towers synchronize handoffs using satellite time, and newer wireless networks depend on it even more, since neighboring towers share identical radio frequencies in split-second turns. The reference clocks behind much of the internet trace back to the same source. Aviation depends on it for more than maps. Modern approach paths let aircraft fly a precise route down to a runway using satellite guidance alone, without needing a ground beacon at every single airfield. At sea, cargo ships broadcast their satellite position constantly, so nearby vessels and coastal authorities always know exactly where each ship sits, day or night, in dense fog or clear open water. Countless other systems lean on the same signal in smaller ways. Tractors steering themselves through fields to within a few centimeters, delivery fleets tracking every truck in real time, and the location a phone automatically hands an emergency dispatcher the moment someone calls for help. Follow the thought experiment through now, hour by hour, starting from the exact instant every satellite signal above Earth disappears at once, without warning, on what began as an ordinary morning. In the first few minutes, almost nobody notices anything at all. Phones quietly stop updating a small blue dot on a map, and most people are simply indoors, asleep, or not checking their screens. In the air, it is a different story immediately. Pilots partway through a satellite-guided approach suddenly lose that guidance and must fall back on older instrument landing systems, wherever those older systems still exist. Air traffic controllers, unable to fully trust automated satellite position reports from aircraft, are forced to widen the safety gaps between planes, and traffic above major airports begins to slow down. At sea, thousands of commercial ships lose their exact position within the same hour. Captains who have never once used a sextant in earnest start pulling out paper charts and dead reckoning tables instead. Within that first hour, cell towers that depend on satellite timing begin drifting out of sync with one another, and calls start dropping during the handoff from one tower to the next. Most towers hold a backup clock inside them, usually a small quartz or rubidium oscillator, capable of holding a steady time on its own for a while before the drift becomes noticeable to anyone. That grace period buys hours, not weeks. As it steadily burns down, network congestion grows worse, and in the most badly affected areas, calls and data begin failing outright by the end of the day. On the trading floor, exchanges face a blunt problem. Regulations require synchronized timestamps down to a fraction of a second, a requirement built on the assumption that the satellite clock would always be there. Some markets may be forced to slow trading or halt it outright, rather than risk a legally disputed trade sequence, an outcome regulators have reportedly worried about in private for years without much public discussion. Power grid operators lose their shared timestamp too. Internal clocks hold steady for a while, but the finely synchronized continent-wide view of the grid, used to catch instability early, slowly begins to blur. A grid rarely fails the instant its finest instruments go blind. It fails if an ordinary fluctuation happens to arrive during that blindness, and nobody on shift catches it quickly enough to respond. Farther from the cities, precision farming stalls mid-task. Self-steering tractors guiding themselves through a field lose their guidance and either stop outright or hand control back to a driver who has not steered by hand in years. Emergency services face their own significant challenge. Dispatchers still answer every call, but the automatic location system built into modern phones grows far less reliable, forcing callers to describe their surroundings the old-fashioned way. Supply chains do not collapse in a single day, but tracking systems for trucks, trains, and shipping containers, all built around satellite position reporting, begin showing stale, frozen locations instead of live, moving ones. By the end of that first day, nothing is necessarily broken for good, but nearly every system that depended on exact time and position is running on backup clocks and improvised routines instead of the satellite signal. A full global blackout of every satellite at once has never actually happened. Smaller, localized outages happen somewhere on Earth on a regular basis. In 2016, researchers documented ships in the Black Sea whose satellite navigation suddenly reported them sitting on dry land, in airport miles from the coast, while the vessels were still plainly at sea. That was spoofing, not simple jamming. Someone nearby was broadcasting counterfeit satellite signals strong enough to override the genuine ones, feeding false positions to any receiver that happened to be listening. Since Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in 2022, jamming and spoofing incidents over the Black Sea and Baltic Sea have surged sharply, and airline crews now log satellite navigation failures on those routes routinely. In 2024, at least one airline suspended flights to an airport in the Baltic region after crews reported satellite guidance becoming too unreliable to trust safely during landing approaches. North Korea has jammed satellite signals over South Korea on multiple occasions since 2010, disrupting commercial flights and fishing boats near the border for days at a stretch each time. In the Persian Gulf, ships have reported spoofing incidents that shifted their charted position by miles, nearly steering vessels into busy shipping lanes or shallow water they had no real reason to be in. Investigators traced each of these incidents to a ground transmitter near a coastline, operated for a specific motive: military cover, commercial advantage, or territorial control. Internal system faults can also cause outages. In 2019, Europe's Galileo system suffered an outage lasting nearly a week after a technical fault in its ground control segment, leaving the satellites in orbit broadcasting normally while their timing signals became unusable for navigation on the ground. That same year, a routine rollover in the GPS calendar counter-reset the calculated date on some older, unpatched receivers back to 1999, corrupting timestamps on equipment that had never been updated for the change. A 2017 study commissioned by the United Kingdom government estimated that a 5-day loss of satellite navigation and timing could cost the British economy more than £1 billion a day, most of it from disruptions to shipping, aviation, and financial services. A 2019 study for the United States government estimated that satellite navigation supports well over $1 trillion in American economic activity each year, and that a full month-long nationwide outage could cost roughly $1 billion a day. Those figures cover only one country. The 4 constellations together serve nearly every economy on Earth. Nature carries its own version of the threat. In 2003, a burst of solar storms degraded satellite navigation accuracy worldwide for days, and in 2022, a geomagnetic storm dragged down dozens of newly launched satellites entirely. In 2012, a solar eruption comparable in size to the Carrington event crossed Earth's orbital path and missed the planet by roughly 9 days. NASA-funded researchers later estimated that a direct hit could have caused $1 trillion in damage and taken years to fully repair. The historical benchmark for a true worst case remains the Carrington event of 1859, a solar storm so powerful it set telegraph wires on fire, decades before a single satellite ever existed in orbit. The people who run this infrastructure have spent years building backup systems for exactly this kind of failure. Newer GPS-3 satellites, first launched in 2018, carry an encrypted military signal called M-code, engineered specifically to resist jamming and spoofing far better than the older civilian broadcast. The full constellation of these satellites is still being launched today, one at a time, alongside the aging spacecraft they are gradually replacing. Inside most cell towers and grid substations sits a small backup clock that keeps its own precise time for hours or even days after the satellite signal disappears entirely. Engineers call this holdover, and it is the reason a short satellite outage rarely causes visible chaos. The backup clock simply keeps ticking as though nothing unusual had happened at all. A cheap oscillator drifts noticeably within hours, while an expensive one can hold steady for days, and most networks were never actually built assuming an outage would last that long. Ships still carry paper charts as a matter of routine, and until fairly recently, officer training had let a very old skill fade away, navigating by the stars with nothing but a sextant. The United States Naval Academy actually removed celestial navigation from its curriculum in the late 1990s, then reinstated it in the mid-2010s, explicitly citing worries about satellites being jammed in a future conflict. On land, an older radio navigation system called LORAN once served as a ground-based backup to satellites entirely, broadcasting from powerful land transmitters instead of anything orbiting overhead. The United States shut the network down, judging satellite navigation reliable enough to make it redundant. The United Kingdom and South Korea reached a different conclusion, building or restarting enhanced ground-based timing systems of their own, explicitly designed to keep clocks running even without any satellite signal at all. These enhanced systems, known as LORAN, transmit from powerful ground stations at a much lower frequency than any satellite, strong enough to penetrate buildings and basements where satellite signal often cannot reach. The United States has since moved to build a similar nationwide terrestrial backup of its own, though the effort has been remarkably slow to materialize. So imagine the signal actually goes dark everywhere all at once on an ordinary morning. How would the world claw its way back from a morning like that? If satellites could be repaired or replaced quickly, normal service might return within days. If the failure ran deeper and lasted longer, cities would need to lean on ground-based backups for weeks, not hours. Trust would return more slowly than the signal itself. Engineers who lived through the outage would spend years afterward adding backup systems that no longer assumed the satellite signal would always be there. Regulators in finance and aviation alike would likely rewrite the very rules that once assumed a satellite clock would always be available and never fail. Most real satellite navigation outages remain regional and temporary, caused by jamming, spoofing, or a single bad storm, never a total planetary blackout. Tonight, a few dozen satellites no bigger than a small car will keep broadcasting the exact time to receivers below, and the lights, the flights, and the trades will keep landing right on schedule, 1 nanosecond at a time.